Thank you for watching Policy and Prejudice. My name is Chris Stevenson. I've been in a lot of discussions lately regarding music and how music has changed, popular music. A lot of people, especially young people coming up, people in their 20s and 30s, don't really understand the full, complete story behind this. Me having vivid memory of how music was in the early 60s, right up to today, I can say that the music of the 60s and 70s, the artists of the 60s and 70s, produced great songs that changed the world. This was a threat to powers that be on so many levels. During the 60s, you had two major types of music that changed the world greatly. You had the British invasion, you had Motown. Motown leading the way in R&B music. Motown basically wrote the blueprint for R&B music. It got black music out of the doo-wop era and into the soul music era, so to speak. You know, I don't have to tell you about the great artists they had. Stevie Wonder, The Temptations, Marvin Gaye, The Supremes. You know, the list is endless. There were other labels also, other record companies that produced great R&B. You know, you had Stax, you know, black-owned at the time, as well as others, you know, other labels going on. Atlantic had Aretha Franklin. You know, you had the greatest depth of music and musicians and artists than you had in any other era in history. So you went from the early 60s to the late 60s, that was the wave going around. The British invasion basically came out, they were imitating Motown at first, Motown and Chuck Berry, and then they started writing their own music. You know, you had with groups like the Beatles, the Yardbirds, the Rolling Stones, things like this. The late 60s was the psychedelic era, and music was more political. You had a lot of anti-war songs. You had a lot of songs that basically reflected the times, reflected where youths wanted to go, where they wanted to experiment with drugs as far as sex and things like this was going on. I think the last straw came about, however, when people like Marvin Gaye began singing about anti-war songs, especially anti-Vietnam songs, which the government had a big problem with. Once you had these artists coming on, it was now the early 70s, you had songs like What's Going On, Get Up, Stand Up by Bob Marley. You know, people were, you know, you had the songwriters. The era of the songwriters came about. This became quite troublesome for a few while these artists were selling millions of copies around the world. And they made people think. Their lyrics, the genius of their songs and their music is unsurpassed even to this day. So what happened was, what I've noticed taking place especially between starting in 1975 and climaxing around 1978 was something called disco. Disco was a drastic departure from R&B. In some ways, disco advertised itself from R&B. But it was just, the message was, don't think, just get up and dance. Along the same time, you had the freeform FM radio, low-frequency radio rock music that entertained black artists as well as white artists. Underground radio was called back then. That was going the way of the dinosaur as well. So what was introduced was a more racist form of radio that excluded the Stevie Wonders, the Funkadelics, the Marvin Gayes, whatever. And it was all about REO Speedwagon, Nazareth, you know, and bands like this. And AOR, the AOR format, the album-oriented rock format, it was called, became the thing going on for radio. Top 40 began being dominated by disco and AOR type groups. Even reggae music was going from politics and moving on to something called dance hall, which is really just disco Jamaican music. That's all it really was. So you didn't have Bob Marley and people like Jimmy Cliff and other people, as the way you used to have. And something more conspicuously happened. You see the assassinations of three of music's most political artists. Marvin, Marley, the assassination attempt towards Marley came even before his death, by CIA agents. John Lennon, of course, figures very prominently also. The music industry executives wanted these men out of the way. What was the main thing going on? Disco coincided and eventually became pretty much a soundtrack to an emerging virus, a man-made virus called AIDS. Something that was used, it turned something beautiful into something ugly. Having sexual relations became a risk. And it was targeted towards blacks, although gay people in the beginning were the guinea pigs. Horrible thing. AIDS is still around today. But what's going on here is how music, which is really an art form that is very personal, has been manipulated to become something of a mind control device. It takes an ugly mind to do that. In the beginning, of course, you had rap music in the late 70s, starting around 79, right up until the 80s. Rap music was okay, it was mindless fun. And then it got political officially when a group recorded a song called The Message. I'm trying to think of the name of the artist now. I can't think of him. Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5, that's who it was. Once The Message came out, you had people like Public Enemy, the Jungle Brothers, other people giving out pro-black messages, invoking Malcolm X. People were wearing Malcolm X hats at that time. This went on up until about the early 90s. Then a couple of songs really began to irk the establishment. There was a self-made group out of Compton called NWA. They recorded a song called F the Police. I can't say the actual word, of course. You all know what I'm talking about. And then there was a song called Cop Killer by Ice-T. These songs written right around the early 90s, 91, 92. Cop Killer was basically the last straw. Ice-T had a rock group, a black rock group, Heavy Metal Brothers from South Central, pretty much I assume, as his backup band. They were called Body Count. This song was banned eventually, and I would assume that shortly after that, music executives met in smoking rooms and decided to form a new type of music based on a perverted version of the gangster type rap that NWA was doing. It was called gangster rap, but it was the lyrics were directed only towards violence against blacks. At that time, I don't think you can get a contract back in that time with these white record companies unless you were going to rap about neighborhood feuds, neighborhood beefs. So that, it instigated a lot of rivalry, and words and such as bitches and hoes became very dominant within rap music. These were words referring mostly to black females. There were people who protested this, prominent politicians, black activists, and everything. But the thing is, it really wasn't the major thing. What was going on was the music labels, the music industry propped up an illiterate, basically grammar school level bully named Suge Knight, a former USFL football player of all things, to head a company tragically called Death Row. What Suge Knight did was gather some of the leading artists, rap artists around. He did pretty much the same thing that Clive Davis did with Casablanca and Arista Records during the mid-'70s. He put some of the biggest names on his label, Dr. Dre, Ice Cube, people like this, Tupac, and others on this record, and they began glorifying violence and drugs and misogyny, whatever. Also, Mr. Knight, Suge Knight, was also an instigator. He's a very divisive person, very petty. Thus was initiated a feud between two of the biggest rappers in the country at that time, in the world, Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls. This led to the tragic deaths of both. The message with young people, of course, was, kill each other. It didn't matter that most rap music was being brought by white kids. White kids don't have the reality problems that black kids have. White kids, they just grabbed they ate up the rap music genre. They listened to it. After they finished listening to it, it was life. Life went on for them. They went back to doing what they were doing. Black youths, poor black youths, of course, they tended to be more impressionable. They listen to the lyrics. They want to be like whatever the rapper was advertising himself as in the video. They were encouraged to form cliques against each other, fight each other at the drop of a hat. Almost everything became a diss to them. Therefore, the music industry set black society back for decades. It's a horrible thing, horrible travesty, excuse me. And it's still going on today. Rap music is this, basically a soundtrack to even pants sagging. Those of you who don't understand the plot behind pants sagging, in the early 90s, I say the mid 90s, there were pants began being manufactured just to sag after a while. It wasn't good. Whereas bell bottoms only lasted 10 years, zoot suits back in the 40s and 50s, whatever, they lasted 15 years. Sagging pants is now well over its 20th year of existence. That's highly unusual. That is suspiciously long for a fashion trend to exist. You should think about that. We've all talked about the origins of this, pants sagging and everything. People talk about how it started in prisons and everything. But it's made to retard the development of black men. Once they saw the power of music to question government, to question society, to question corporate America, they felt that they had to bring out something new. And they did it. Something as simple as gangster rap filled their bill. And that's part of the reason we're in this state today. Coinciding with the rise of gangster rap was, of course, the drug known as crack cocaine. This led to the formation of black youth gangs, and they were instituting laws amongst themselves throughout the country, starting in South Central Los Angeles, based on their own immaturity. Millions of lives have been lost since then. The prison industry experienced a boom. Prison industrial complex to this very day is flourishing. You know, the Rockefeller drug laws, which started in 1973, began to become enforced, especially after Bill Clinton signed the crime bill during the early 90s. He did this, you know, Clinton did a lot of damaging things in order to win re-election. You know, a lot of you say he's the first black president. No, Obama fills the bill just fine with that. You know, just fine with me as far as that's concerned. People have to open their eyes. But when you see these videos today, especially on MTV, BET, whatever network you're watching, understand that this is to be viewed only as entertainment. That's it. Don't try to imitate the artist and the ridiculous behavior that they're professing. You know, what's going on in media today is just an overall, across-the-board corruption of the mind. Reality shows as well. You know, they're now telling women, young black women especially, how to act unreasonable, how to act ridiculous and confrontational. That's their way of going after the women. They already got the men. They already got the young boys. Now they want the women to act insane. So now you got these shows like Bad Girls Club, Desperate Basketball Wives, and Desperate Housewives of ... name whatever city the show is being aired in. And you'll see this whole thing being played out. Their goal is to brainwash your daughters. That's what they're hoping to do. So all of this here started with music, with popular music. That's not to say that there's no good artists today. There are. There's not as many, nearly as there used to be, but there's talent out there. But most of the talent today does not stand a chance in terms of quality as it did back in the day, especially during the 60s and 70s. There's no, you know, you really don't have a lot of artists today that can stand up to the scrutiny of quality and the level of entertainment that we had back then. It's just the way it is. So, in closing, I urge you, yes, to continue to enjoy music, continue to be an audience, but don't allow yourself to be a captive audience. Just pay attention to the lyrics and know what to avoid. My name is Chris Stevenson. For clbTV, this is Policy and Prejudice. You have a good week.